And then I told him, they put Mario on the beach now. Next thing you know, he's gonna be in freaking outer space. They already did that. Well, shut the front door and bend me over, Jerry. They've blown my mind again.
Sir, this is a library. I'd like to ask you to please...
Hold on. Some ugly four-eyed prick's trying to talk to me. What?
This is a library. Can you please not make phone calls in here?
Yeah, but did you hear that they put Mario in outer space now? How did they even think of that?
I don't know. Do I look like Nintendo to you? Is that your desk over there? Yeah? Then yes, you do.
Whenever a new 3D Mario game releases, it's a big deal. A really big deal. Ever since Super Mario 64 hit the shelves, each new entry has brought exciting new gameplay, innovative concepts, and most importantly, loads of fun. Super Mario Galaxy was no exception, releasing on the Wii in 2007 to massive worldwide critical acclaim. It truly pushed the boundaries of Mario and 3D platformers in general, just like the previous two entries. So, when it was announced that we would be getting a direct sequel to the game with even more content to explore, it's safe to say that many of us were ecstatic. Super Mario Galaxy 2, boasting many new galaxies, Yoshi as a helpful companion, and much more, was simply looking to be more of what fans loved about the first game, with its own unique twists. But was the twist unique enough? Well, that's up for debate, but we're not debating yet, so put the weapons down for now.
This is a waffle.
The Super Mario Galaxy series contains two of the most legendary games of all time, selling over 20 million copies combined by the end of their lifespan. However, many regard the second game as superior to the first in most aspects. Is this really true, and is the second entry really as perfect as people cut it out to be? Well, not as much as you would think. Welcome to episode 4 of Creating the Best Sequel, a show where we aim to take a deep dive into the design of our favorite games and discuss what could be done to create the greatest sequel possible. This episode covers Super Mario Galaxy 2, the seemingly inevitable sequel to Super Mario Galaxy that everyone wanted but nobody knew was coming. I want to discuss how Galaxy 2 improved and reiterated upon the previous entry, and obviously what could be improved upon in a potential sequel. Let's talk about it. The Mario series has never been known for its amazing stories. It's almost always as simple as Bowser took Peach, now go get her, with some variation in how he manages to kidnap her. This is the case with just about every game in the series, with the exception of a few of the Paper Mario games, as well as few of the other Mario RPGs, but I feel those are in a category of their own. Is this lack of story a bad thing though? I guess the answer to that question depends on who you're asking.
What the hell are y'all asking me for?
The lack of story in Mario games is usually attributed to series creator Shigeru Miyamoto, who personally doesn't believe a dense narrative is necessary to have within that type of game, and that it only adds unneeded fluff that takes away from the gameplay, which has always been the main focus of Mario. Many people don't really agree with this statement and would love to see a deeper lore established in the Mario universe, but it also makes sense to an extent. Mario encapsulates a large audience of players, including a large casual audience, which means people who just want to play the game and not sit through cutscenes and read text boxes, which is fine, don't get me wrong, but it's important to acknowledge that these players exist. No matter how much you want story in your Mario game, these players still exist, and Miyamoto still thinks that the story isn't necessary. With that said though, I will now proceed to complain about the lack of story anyway. Oddly enough, the story in Galaxy 2 compared to the first entry is even more bare bones and simplified. To better understand this, let's take a look at the first game's story first. Galaxy 1 begins on the eve of the Star Festival, which is an event that happens every 100 years when a comet passes over the Mushroom Kingdom, showering the land with stardust and star bits. Shortly after the beginning of the game, inevitably, Bowser shows up to perform thousands of dollars, or coins, in property damage. During the attack, Bowser also does some sort of magic and encases all of the kingdom's residents into the crystals you see so often throughout the game, which is a cool way to contextualize their frequent inclusion in the levels. And then, completely out of left field, a literal UFO shows up and shoots lasers in a circular motion around the castle, essentially detaching it from the land below. There is never any explanation as to where Bowser got these UFOs, so I guess he's in cahoots with an alien civilization for this game. After this, the airships attach themselves to the castle and begin to lift it off the ground into the sky. Princess Peach and her Luma are both still standing on the balcony of the castle, so obviously Mario takes off running towards the castle to save them. Eventually, as the castle rises up higher into the sky with Mario standing at the base, Kamek shows up to confront him, casting a spell that sends him flying away with the message, "So long, enjoy your flight." Here's a fun fact though. In the Chinese version of the game, this exact message from Kamek directly translates to, "Go to hell." Yep, I think that one works way better.
Go to hell!
Bowser states during his short monologue that he's kidnapping Princess Peach this time to come along for the creation of a brand new galaxy. This alone is a really cool premise to the game, but it also definitely had been way more than any Mario game had ever done beforehand. Arguably, Super Mario Sunshine's premise was also cool and also slightly more in-depth than usual, but not nearly as unique as Galaxy's was. It may seem like old news now, but at the time of its release, this story was mind-blowing for a Mario game. Later into Galaxy 1, you unlock the library of the Comet Observatory, which brings even more lore to the universe of the game. As you progress through the game, each of the 9 chapters of Rosalina's storybook unlock for the player to view in the library. This book tells an origin story of sorts about Rosalina herself, outlining how she came to be the caregiver of all the Lumas. Once in the library, she can read each of the chapters to Mario and the Lumas. You're probably wondering how all this extra fluff of story actually got into the game. Well, the storybook script was actually written in its entirety in a single night by series director Yoshiaki Koizumi late at night when nobody else was at the office. He didn't want anyone to know about the storybook until it was completed. The next morning, he showed the script to Miyamoto, who was very surprised that he wrote the entire thing in a single night. By some miracle, the storybook managed to make its way into the game as a story in the optional library that I mentioned earlier. We don't really see any extra lore like this added to any other Mario game, so that's why the storybook's inclusion was so surprising, especially since it was run through Miyamoto before even being added.
Mario slowly runs his fingers down Yoshi's snout. The tension is incredible.
There better not be a single word of story going on in here.
Finally, moving on to Galaxy 2's story though, we can see an alarmingly similar premise being used for the introduction to this game as well. The game begins once again during the Star Festival, which, like I said, only happens once every 100 years. Originally, I thought that this game technically was taking place 100 years after the original game, meaning Mario had to have discovered the Fountain of Youth at some point shortly after the first game ended, but then I realized that the ending of Galaxy 1 includes Bowser's new galaxy exploding and creating a massive black hole sucking the entire universe into it. At the last second, Rosalina catches Mario as he's being sucked in, and then proceeds to reset the entire universe back to its initial state. This explains why the Star Festival happens again directly at the beginning of Galaxy 2, since technically it hadn't even happened yet in that specific universe. On one hand, I see this as a cop-out premise for the second game, because it's literally just the first game again, but slightly different, and arguably worse. Like, you reset the entire f***ing universe, in turn giving yourself endless possibilities with the narrative of the next game. But instead, you do the exact same thing as the first one, again. On the other hand though, I see this as a reasonable premise considering the events of the first game. With the resetting of the universe often comes the implication of history repeating itself, so with this in mind, it seems reasonable that the Star Festival Bowser attack scenario would happen again in a very similar fashion, so I'm kind of torn on what I think about this story. Then again, on surface level, it really is just a recycling of the first game's plot up until you reach the end of the game, other than the fact that you're on Starship Mario now instead of the Comet Observatory. So I'd say it's mostly just a lazy design choice, or an excuse for Miyamoto to strip even more story away from this game. I guess what I'm trying to say after all this babbling is that the story in Galaxy 2 was just too bare bones, at least for my tastes. Ideally, in a potential sequel I'd love to see something similar to the first game's story, but just pushed a bit further. Offer up a few more cutscenes in the middle part of the game that further the story and deepen the lore, but not too many so that it ruins the pacing. This really is more of a problem with the Mario series as a whole than just Galaxy 2, but I'd argue that means it's even more important to mention here now. At the end of the day, I do agree with Miyamoto on his value of gameplay centricity in Mario games, and while I personally love a Mario game with a huge focus on story, I know that most people wouldn't, at least in the casual crowd. Speaking of gameplay though, the design of Super Mario Galaxy 2 is arguably some of the most polished in the series, having a myriad of meticulously designed levels filled with tons of concepts and gimmicks. It's honestly amazing just how many ideas this game is able to throw at you within such a short amount of time, and even more so by the fact that every gimmick you come across is usually super interesting, creative, and most importantly, fun. The best word I think I could use to describe the design of this game has to just be tight.
Tight? That's seriously the best word you could think of. What do you mean? What's wrong with that? How the f is a game gonna be tight? Well, I just mean like, this shirt is tight. A game? How did you? It can't be tight.
Compared to the first game, the level design of Galaxy 2 is even more linear than the last. All the previous 3D Mario games had a pretty big focus on exploration within their levels, essentially having more open levels in smaller quantities. Galaxy took a different approach and embraced a sense of linearity in each of its levels. When a star mission is selected, the player is given their objective via the intro cutscene, and then once they gain control over Mario, the path to the star is mostly linear. This wasn't always the case in Galaxy 1, with some levels being relatively open compared to others, but with Galaxy 2, there are very few levels that feel open or that actively encourage exploration. However, linearity isn't necessarily a bad thing, especially when executed correctly, which I think this game did to an extent. The increased linearity of Galaxy 2 even further helped it in creating a heavily polished and focused experience with its levels. I will admit that the game does reward you for somewhat going off the beaten path as well as surveying your surroundings sometimes, but it's often rewarded with something that has very little use to the player, but we'll get to that soon. Throughout the game, there are many galaxies that contain extra stars to collect known as secret stars. These stars can be found somewhere within one of the main missions for that galaxy, and obviously also involve going off the intended path to find them. You'd think that this alone would supplement the game's lack of exploration, but their execution, at least most of the time, isn't as exploratory as you may think. Returning from the first game are Hungry Lumas, which are essentially the game's way of getting rid of your surplus of star bits and in turn giving you access to new areas of the game. Galaxy 2 now has Hungry Lumas for coins as well, and these are how the majority of the secret stars are accessed. Instead of cleverly hiding a path to the secret star within the level, often a Hungry Luma accepting coins is hidden just out of plain sight. Once you feed them the correct amount of coins, in Hungry Luma fashion, they transform into a new planet. This planet usually contains a small platforming challenge that obviously leads to the secret star, which is fine, I guess, but at that point don't even call it a secret star. There's nothing secret about coughing up your hard-earned money to some random star dude on the side of the road that claims he's hungry for currency. I think you're actually just supporting an addiction at that point.
Spare change. Spare change, ma'am.
Luma! Luma!
Is that you?
I'm honestly really unsure about whether or not I want to say that the lack of exploration is a bad thing, but if I were to somewhat meet in the middle on the issue, I'd still say that there'd need to be a bit more than there is right now. While Galaxy 1 didn't feel as polished in its design, possibly due to the growing pains it had shifting from the previous 3D Mario's huge focus on exploration and discovery, I think it struck a nice balance between exploration and linearity compared to Galaxy 2. However, because of how much the polished and focused linear design of Galaxy 2 benefited its quality, I'd say a slightly different approach would need to be made in a potential sequel when it comes to player discovery and exploration. One thing that comes to mind is secret exits. Secret exits are a very common feature found in most of the 2D Mario games, and involve finding an alternate exit to a level that consequently takes you to a different place on the world map that wasn't the originally intended path. This could lead to a secret level, a toad house, or a warp to an entirely new world. In the case of a potential sequel to Galaxy 2 though, I believe secret exits could be implemented into some galaxies that lead to other secret galaxies on the map. These exits could either replace the secret stars or work alongside them to encourage even more exploration for the player, all while keeping the focused linearity of the game intact. These additional galaxies could either be segues that warp you to later parts of the world or to another world entirely, or just simply extra content for completionists to tackle. Either way, it could scratch the itch of people who don't like pure linearity. Regardless, whatever route they take is going to be way better than paying your coins to Illuma. Speaking of coins though, they obviously aren't the only currency in the game, and I believe that the currencies in this game are one of the biggest problems it has. The main currency of the game, star bits, are scattered everywhere across levels and are also mainly used to feed hungry Lumas. With these Lumas though, fully feeding them unlocks entire new galaxies instead of just planets within existing ones. For the most part, getting enough star bits for these Lumas happens naturally as you progress through the game as long as you're making a conscious effort to collect them. Additionally, there will sometimes be another type of Luma in a level that is commonly placed before a boss that will charge you 30 star bits for either a life up heart or a 1-up. For the most part, I don't really think there's a problem with the way star bits are handled for this entry, but coins on the other hand, well, that's a different story. I think I just have problems with anything involving coins in this game.
Okay, welcome to the second annual Opinions About Coins meeting. Would anyone like to share their opinions about coins first? I guess you.
Yes!
Coins. I f***ing hate them. And here's why. Part 1. The history of currency.
The main purpose of coins in Galaxy 2, as well as in all of its predecessors, is to restore your HP. Each coin restores 1 out of your 3 points of health. Additionally, your coin total for the current level is kept track of during each life, as well as your overall coin total showing while on Starship Mario. The level attempt specific coins obviously have their use with the Hungry Lumas, but the running coin total on Starship Mario has very little practical use in the game. The only one I can think of involves the 2 Lumas that eventually show up inside one of the pipes on the ship that will charge you some coins to allow you to roll some dice for a varying number of 1-ups. And sadly, this is really the only place you can spend your coins. By the end of my playthrough, I had coins in the thousands, and I wasn't exactly gasping for more lives at any point either. In fact, let's talk about lives as well. I would technically consider them a currency too, except in this scenario you're paying with your consciousness instead of some pieces of expensive metal, but the concept is there regardless. Everyone knows that a 1-up grants you an extra life. In Galaxy 2, the lives counter maxes out at 99. In theory, you would be able to reach this point fairly easily considering how many 1-ups are thrown at the player. Like, these things are literally everywhere. For example, there are teleport pads scattered around each of the galaxies that warp you to a short combat challenge when spinned on. Completing these extremely simple and repetitive challenges rewards you with 3 1-ups. Collecting 50 coins or 100 star bits also rewards you with a 1-up. Even further, 1-ups are also hidden in random out-of-sight areas of each level, and like I mentioned earlier, can often be purchased from the blue shop Lumas before a boss. In other words, you could wipe your ass with these things.
The bank tells me they're repossessing my home. I asked them if they would accept 1-ups from Super Mario Galaxy 2 as a form of alternate payment. And they had the audacity to look at me like I'm the crazy one.
After hearing that, it really seems like you'd always be at or around the maximum life count for the entirety of your playthrough, right? Wrong! And you want to know why? It's so painfully obvious that the developers knew that 1-ups were so f***ing abundant and plentiful because they reset back to 4 every single time you load your save file. Granted, this had been the case in every other 3D Mario game that came before it, but why should that make it any more acceptable? Frankly, lives were an outdated, or at least poorly executed concept ever since Mario 64, and it never really got better. I know I've said this many times before, but developers often include lives in their game just for the sake of including lives, and since the 1-up mushroom is such an iconic item of Mario and gaming as a whole, they likely just didn't want to remove it for that exact reason. So, how could all of these currency problems be solved? Well, for one, and you probably saw this coming, I'd completely remove the concept of lives from the game entirely. This is sort of a pointless thing to mention, as later down the line in Super Mario Odyssey this exact thing happened, but it's also worth mentioning because Odyssey's handling of player death makes a lot more sense in the modern frame of game design. In Odyssey, whenever you die you lose a portion of your coins and are sent back to the nearest checkpoint you touched. Once your coins reach 0, you simply just can't go any lower, which means that there is no way to game over. Adopting this exact system in Galaxy 2 would work wonders for the pacing of the gameplay. As it stands now, every time the player dies, they have to sit through an animation of their lives counter going down, and whenever they game over, they lose all the checkpoints on the current galaxy, get sent back to Starship Mario, and are forced to play through sections they had already completed in order to get back to where they were before the game over. This isn't a fair punishment for repeated death, it's just annoying, and is also likely to push away less experienced players who may die more often than others. Additionally, instead of removing all the 1-ups found in those out-of-sight areas I mentioned, another secondary collectible catered towards completionists could replace every single instance of them. One idea I had involved implementing something similar to the Musée Champignon in Paper Mario the Origami King. This building, located in Toad Town, slowly fills out with additions to its exhibits throughout your playthrough, including the enemies you've defeated, toads you've rescued, treasures you've found, and music you've heard. The most important part of the museum in the context of this conversation, though, is the art gallery. Throughout your adventure in Origami King, you will run into over 400 hidden toads folded up into origami and shoved into various areas. Each toad you collect will award you with a single toad point. You can then return to the museum and spend these toad points to unlock concept art from the game's development. In the context of a sequel to Galaxy 2, replacing every single instance of a 1-up with something similar to the Hidden Toads, as well as including something similar to the museum within whatever the hub world may be, would be amazing. In addition, they could also implement the same concept of treasures from Origami King into its museum as well. Treasures can be found just about everywhere, similar to the toads, but can be viewed once found because the treasures themselves are 3D models of various things found throughout the game that you can view in the museum once collected. Alternatively, even if 1-ups were kept in the game, the museum could accept coins to unlock the concept art instead, which would also be a huge help in solving the issue of coins having very little utility within the running grand total on Starship Mario. Obviously, if the secondary collectible for concept art was present, the purpose of coins would now be completely lost, save for the hungry Lumas and obviously their miraculous health restoring properties. In this scenario, I believe a sufficient additional use of coins could involve something similar to outfits in Mario Odyssey, because who doesn't love dressing up Mario? Or undressing him?
Oh, yeah.
What in the hell?
Doing it this way would definitely be my preferred outcome, but if 1-ups had to stay, using coins for the museum would still be a great utilization of the huge surplus of them that you eventually amass by the end of the game. I bet you didn't know these puppies come in a purple variant as well though. Let's talk about prankster comments. Prankster comments are a separate type of star in Galaxy 1 and 2 that essentially remix missions that you've already completed. This could involve killing a series of enemies, completing a segment of the missions without taking damage or within a strict time limit, collecting 100 purple coins, or completing an objective while avoiding the cosmic clones that spawned continuously in your previous path. In Galaxy 1, each unique objective that came from a comet gave the comet its own distinctive name and color. For example, purple comets were obviously purple and involved collecting the purple coins. Cosmic comets were blue and obviously involved the cosmic clones. Oddly enough, every single comet in Galaxy 2 is only known simply as a prankster comet, which is an odd change to make between games. It's not like Galaxy 2 only had one singular scenario that came from comets, there were 6 different types of them for this entry. None of them are distinguished from each other than the names on the star missions, but that's not really a big problem at all compared to the quality of some of the comets themselves. While the majority of prankster comets in Galaxy 2 are pretty fun to complete, I feel that a considerable amount of them can be a bit boring and eventually repetitive to go through. The worst culprit of this has to be any of the comets with the romp prefix attached to them. These comets are the missions that involve killing a group of enemies. They usually take place in an area used by a previous star, but the catch is that it's obviously now filled with a bunch of enemies. Your objective really is as simple as kill them all, sometimes with a rainbow star, sometimes normally, but the overall concept is still the same. I personally find these missions in particular to be a bit lazy and rushed design-wise. I mean, most of the time there isn't anything super interesting about the mission, and they almost feel like they were added only to reach the conventional number of 120 stars in the main game. While some of the other comets aren't the greatest in terms of creating a unique experience, I believe that these were the worst of them all. With all of that said, there are still 2 major aspects of the design of Galaxy 2 that I haven't touched on so far. With the first one being the character that appears on the front of the game's box, of which I haven't even really acknowledged yet, Yoshi. Yoshi was seemingly marketed as a big selling point of Galaxy 2, essentially being framed as the quote-unquote big thing being added in the sequel. However, it really wasn't like that. Yoshi really just ends up being another one of the countless gimmicks that gets used a few times and thrown away. This is at least a bit exaggerated in Yoshi's case, but hear me out for a second and it may make more sense. In the second galaxy of the game, the Yoshi Star Galaxy, Yoshi is introduced to the player for the first time. This is where they learn the basic controls and utilization of the green dinosaur, and it almost makes it seem like this is a companion that will be utilized frequently throughout the game. And while Yoshi does appear throughout the game quite a few times, it's definitely not as often as the box art would lead you to believe. After playing through this second time, I realized that Yoshi was very similar to the Fire Flower, or the Spring, or the Booshroom in terms of its place in the game's design. Yoshi is essentially just another power-up in the game as opposed to a companion to Mario. Now, you may be saying, well, Yoshi also has 3 power-ups of his own, and you would be correct. There are 3 different power-ups that Yoshi gets to use throughout the game. However, 2 of them completely remove all the original abilities that Yoshi had, essentially meaning the player is in a completely different state of gameplay. And the last one is just a glorified lamp, not super interesting. While it may seem like Yoshi's power-ups should increase or power up the abilities of Yoshi, it does quite the opposite, in most cases stripping them away to complete a challenge specifically curated for that power-up. Regardless, there actually is a boss you fight later in the game with Yoshi, and the way it's designed is almost exactly how I actually wanted Yoshi to be implemented throughout the entire game, using the unique moveset to complete a challenge that almost didn't seem like it was made just so Yoshi could be used in it. I know that many people wouldn't exactly enjoy a Mario game with that much focus on a companion, but I personally feel it would have been a great change of pace to distinguish the 2 games from each other a bit better. Plus, Yoshi is cool. How do you think he felt only getting 3 games in the spotlight up until this point?
It's okay. You'll get your time. Shh. You'll get your time.
Speaking of bosses though, they are the final aspect of the design of Galaxy 2 that I want to touch on, and I really don't have much to say about them. They're very well designed, each encounter is unique, and they're fun to fight every time. Though, my one complaint about them is a complaint that's common among many video game bosses in general. Some of the boss's weak points are so blatantly obvious that I feel like they're insulting my intelligence. Listen, I know that Mario games are technically supposed to be for kids, and in turn, easy for kids to understand and complete. However, even a toddler could understand some of these bosses' weak points. Oh boy, how on earth am I gonna damage this boss? It can't be that giant red nose, or that huge ground pound symbol, or that enormous exposed ass, or that enormous exposed jiggly ass. Do you see what I mean here?
Alright, this is ridiculous!
To be fair, not all of the bosses are like this, but since such a considerable amount of them are, I'd view that as somewhat of a problem. Not the biggest problem in the world, which is why I waited until the end of the section to mention it, but a problem nonetheless. In a potential sequel, I would love to see all of the bosses require at least a little bit of thought into their methods of defeat. It provides a far greater amount of satisfaction for the player and just improves the experience overall. Separate from the design of the game is the overall feel, and while this still may contain various aspects of the design, obviously, I felt it was better that I put it into a separate section. Something related to feel that likely comes to mind first is the controls. I've noticed that the controls in both of the Galaxy games feel drastically different in comparison to any of the other 3D entries. Overall, the controls in these games feel a lot more floaty, sluggish, and sometimes even limited. Because this adventure takes place in outer space, the floatiness was likely implemented for that exact reason, but there's a lot of other things that just feel off to me. There's no way to dive, for example. Side flips are weirdly slightly more difficult to pull off and abruptly destroy your horizontal speed when you land. Sometimes a glitch occurs where Mario will just continue running in circles for no reason until you let go of the control stick. It's really just a bunch of little annoyances that, when combined, can cause a fair amount of frustration, at least if you were used to the other game's control schemes already. I guess my main issue with these floatier and slower controls is the fact that you can't play the game at your own pace if your pace happens to be any faster than a turtle on a little bit of caffeine. All of the other entries in the series have various movement options that can be strung together to get through sections with ease and blistering speed. In the Galaxy games, all you can really do is spam the long jump to go sort of fast. I suspect that the reason they changed the controls so drastically for these games is because of the overall shift to a more linear design for levels. With more linear design comes less leniency for skips and exploits. With a more limited moveset, each level can be more carefully curated to be completed in a certain way. However, even with that in mind, adding something as simple as a dash button to make Mario run just slightly faster would work wonders for the pacing of the gameplay for more experienced players. Also in the same realm of controls is swimming. The swimming in the Galaxy games is definitely an improvement over previous entries, simply because you can now perform a small boost underwater by using the spin attack, but even that feels extremely minimal in terms of how much faster you go, even when used over and over again. I'd honestly just rather press the A button and swim normally than sit there vigorously shaking the controller. Plus, if anyone was to ever see only the top half of me doing underwater spins in Mario Galaxy, let's just say they wouldn't be thinking, oh hey, that guy's doing underwater spins in Mario Galaxy. Either way, as you could probably guess, just like the rest of the controls, the swimming feels quite sluggish too. This is often somewhat circumvented by the shells that are often present underwater that Mario can pick up and ride, but without them, swimming just feels like a slog. I believe increasing the power and distance of the underwater spin while also making Mario's base swimming speed just a bit faster could make for a far better swimming experience, because right now it's about as fun as stepping into a bathtub with your socks on. Next up, let's talk about the world map. In Galaxy 2, instead of accessing all the levels through separate sectors of the Comet Observatory, a simple world map system was used where Starship Mario moves from galaxy to galaxy on a mostly linear path. And while this is even further building upon the idea that Galaxy 2 was even more linear than its predecessor, I don't really see it as a good thing. At least with the Comet Observatory in Galaxy 1, they contextualized each galaxy by placing them within a pseudo-solar system. Solar systems are actually part of galaxies in real life, not the other way around like this game portrays, but it still makes more sense than a series of yellow lines that lead to them. At the very least, in a potential sequel, I'd like to see a little bit more functionality, exploration, or open-endedness to the world map so that it isn't just what is essentially a straight line to the end. My grand idea for a complete overhaul of how galaxies are accessed involves a web-structured design. Let me explain. When the game begins, Mario will begin at a certain unremarkable point in the universe. With the resources he has at the start, he will only be able to travel to a singular galaxy. As the player progresses through the game, collecting more and more power stars, the distance Mario will be able to travel from the initial point will increase. This may just seem like a more complicated way of implementing the linear world map, but the distance will not just expand in one direction. With each power star collected, an entire radius around Mario will expand to reveal more of the universe, meaning that a new galaxy may be revealed in any direction. The player will then be able to move freely within the discovered radius to travel to each galaxy. Additionally, implementing the secret exit galaxies I mentioned earlier could create something pretty interesting here as well. When a secret exit is found, a black hole could open up on the world map for Mario to travel through. This will then lead to what is essentially a sub-area of the universe that contains the secret galaxy and sometimes maybe even some other things to do. Much like the world map we have now, clusters of star bits and hungry lumas could be found while exploring, even further increasing the depth and interactivity of the overworld itself. This world map design would do well to decrease the linearity of the game, as well as returning to the contextualization of each galaxy's location in the universe. Starship Mario, as you've already seen, or something similar, could also be reused in this context, as Galaxy 2 actually uses this exact idea involving powering the ship with stars, just in a different way. Each time the player collects a Grand Star after beating a world's final boss, Starship Mario will gain enough power to advance to the next world. This implies that each Grand Star is essentially more fuel for the ship, which obviously ties back into the original idea I had earlier. Speaking of Starship Mario, that is the final aspect of the game that I want to talk about today. This hub world does a lot of things better than the Comet Observatory in Galaxy 1, but I also feel it did a few things worse. I really like that as you progress through the game, Starship Mario and the individuals inhabiting it evolve and develop until the entire ship is filled with characters that you met along the way on your adventure. I also like how the skybox changes depending on which world you're currently in, and how every character has a witty remark when spoken to. However, in a best case scenario in a potential sequel, I feel that combining the livelihood of Starship Mario with the larger size of the Comet Observatory would make for the best hub world possible. The Comet Observatory didn't have much to do or see in it, at least compared to Starship Mario and accounting for its overall size, so I feel like combining the best aspects of each one would be the best approach. In conclusion, I still truly believe that Super Mario Galaxy 2 is an amazing game, despite all the negative things I've said about it today. This is creating the best sequel after all, not praising the current game. I'm not here to just sit and gush over this game because trust me, plenty of people have already done that. I do have one final point I want to bring up though. It has probably been apparent throughout this entire discussion that I think this, but did Galaxy 2 really do enough to fully distinguish itself from its predecessor? After all, many of the game's gimmicks, concepts, and even bosses were reused and recycled, sometimes taking it even further than that and reusing entire segments of galaxies. In a sense, Galaxy 2 often almost feels like a fan-made hack of the first game, and I feel it should have done at least a little bit more to make it stand out just a little bit better and truly reiterate upon the previous entry. With all that said though, if a third Super Mario Galaxy game ever did happen, which I highly doubt it ever will, here's your checklist, Nintendo. This is all you ever need to make the next Galaxy game. You won't have to worry, because my opinion is so good and amazing and, most importantly, correct. You're welcome!
I've finally done it! I've collected all 120 of the stars, and we can see the true ending now. Prankster comets have appeared. I already got all of those!
No. There has to be some sort of misunderstanding here.
After you find the first 120 stars in Galaxy 2, the game throws a big middle finger in your face and spreads 120 more of those suckers for you to collect across all of the previous galaxies you visited. but this time they're the same color as asparagus. If you can't tell by now, I am not the biggest fan of these stars additions to the game, but I'm definitely not the smallest fan either. In my first playthrough of this game when it initially released, I got everything. All the yellow stars, Brussels sprout stars, and completed the final level. This time around, I just couldn't go all the way. The broccoli stars just didn't bring about new and unique concepts that kept me coming back during the first 120. Every galaxy gets between 2 and 3 of these stars for the player to find, and they are all located within pre-existing mission scenarios, essentially acting in the same way comets do, which they actually are labeled as in-game. As you would guess, because these take place in exact replicas of existing missions, much like a scavenger hunt, the spinach stars are essentially placed in random locations across each level, which also means that sections of a mission you've already played before in the first 120 stars may have to be replayed 2 or even 3 more times to collect all of the cucumber stars. Granted, these stars definitely do encourage the player to use Mario's entire moveset to get them, and in many cases put up quite a challenge to reach once they're actually spotted, but that's really the only thing I truly enjoy about them. Collecting them is just such a slog because each one is specified as its own separate star, but they only take around 3 to 4 minutes to find and collect at the most. So most of your journey to collect the guacamole stars is spent sitting through sequences and animations you've already seen multiple times before. For example, each time the player enters the star select screen, the comet warning animation will play because, like I said, each cabbage star is considered a prankster comet. Additionally, the star's corresponding mission's default intro will play upon every entry into the galaxy, and this scene is unskippable until the player dies at least once on that mission or returns to the map. I am not saying that I think these cutscenes should be removed though, because they actually often give hints as to where the player can find each star. What I do think though is that they should all be instantly skippable, and if possible, the player shouldn't be kicked out of a celery star mission if there are more to collect in that specific scenario. The main thing that kept me from finding all of them in this playthrough was the sheer amount of unnecessary waiting through animations, cutscenes, and black load screens just to be in a level for like 2 minutes. The process would then rinse and repeat over and over again, and I just got tired of it all real quick. The zucchini stars seem like they are best suited as something I will come back to and find more enjoyment in further down the road, but for now, they can stay uncollected. Hello? Oh, sorry, I forgot to call you back. Yeah, they ended up kicking me out of there. You know, and if I'm being honest, I didn't even know that place was a library.